And now I would like to introduce the fourth speaker, Mrs. Siva. Is the executive director of Arrow, and yeah, here you can see her very long bio, but she's very active in the ICPD and HTD promoting, and she's a very popular speaker representing CSO in many UN high-level forum. And today, Siva will give us presentation on sexual reproductive health and rights towards an economically and socially just world. Yes. Please, Siva.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Though it's like a very gray day, but I hope that our discussions on economic justice did not add to the grayness of the day. I think that once we talk about concepts of injustice frameworks, that sometimes is not really very clearly defined for us, right? And we have seen that there are two ideas basically. So that has already been brought up in the panel. So that one is not only distribution of services in a more equitable and equal manner, but it is also about systems that create economic justice, and then systems that also, because the concept of justice is about intersectionality, right? So you cannot actually have economic justice without gender justice, and you cannot have that without sexual justice nor reproductive justice. So let me just, I hope I'm doing this correctly. How do I move this? Is this the third one? Okay, wait. Yes. Okay, so I decided to do it some provocatively a little bit and say, what does sexy feel like in an economically just world, right? So, as I said, economic justice, there are two key aspects. At the micro level, equity, how institutions distribute specific benefits and burdens. And at the macro level, what does a just social order look like? And this, hence the concept of economic justice can be both equality in the distribution of primary goods, liberty, entitlements, opportunity, possible capabilities, and get this, fairness as non-envy. Now, this is like a, and of course, when we talk about sexual and reproductive health, we also talk about things like sexuality, right? So it is contested and controversial at the international level, as well as national and local policy making and programming, and in public discourses. Yet, it is something, is a central aspect, right, of being human, and it covers sex, gender identity and roles, sexual orientation, eroticism, pleasure, intimacy, and reproduction. And sexuality is experienced and explored through fantasies, thoughts, desires, beliefs, attitude, values, behavior, practices, roles, and relationships. So while all of these encompass sexuality, but we may not experience or express them at all points of time. And I'm not saying this, but the WHO says this, okay? So the realization of rights related to sexuality and reproduction makes a big difference to people's well-being, how people experience well-being, health, social acceptance, and in some cases even life and death, right? And so it bears significantly on how how to live and die, on their physical security, bodily integrity, health, education, mobility, social and economic status, and other factors that relate to poverty. So, and this is somehow what we see even within the SDGs framework and the lead up to the SDGs framework of how this imbalance of health affects people across different parts of our country or different parts of our city even, or even within our own local context, okay? So what do the ground realities to this look like, right? So across all data sets surveyed and studied, we can see that women and young people achieve unequal realization of sexual and reproductive autonomy. And this can range for all of the SRHR issues. Those who belong to higher income groups, who are better educated, live in urban areas, whether it is about accessing a method of contraception of their choice, reproductive health cancer screening, access to comprehensive sexuality education, access to abortion services, they can realize all of it, right? Whereas those who are poorer, live in hard-to-reach areas or rural areas, then all of these outcomes, even if they live in the same city, are drastically different. Okay, so the next one is, okay, so this unequal realization of sexual and reproductive autonomy needs to be interrogated, because we're all governed by the same constitutional frameworks, the laws, the policies are all the same for every one of the citizens, right? So why does this occur? One factor is the lack of equity in distribution of services. Services are concentrated in particular areas, especially urban versus rural. Quality services are demand generated, so the better educated, the better informed the client is, the better their demands, and the service providers fulfill those demands. So hence, in an economically just world, more even distribution of services to all areas and access to quality services to all populations are key factors or key, I think, results in service provision. The second is that inequality within men and women itself causes the unequal distribution in sexual and reproductive health services. Now, within a social justice lens, if we look at SRHR, you can see that the unequal burden of reproduction falls on women, right? And women are the prime targets for contraceptive access and programs as compared to men. And in most of the countries of our region, condoms and vasectomies are minuscule proportions of of the methods that make up contraceptive prevalence rates. So, and in the globe, it looks something like this, right? So if you take 7.7% and you take, 2.6%, so it's less than 10% of methods of contraception are actually practiced by men. But in our region, this is even smaller, right? So of course, when we talk about justice and we talk about economic justice, even when we are providing the services, we need to understand there's a gender justice in the way we are treating women and men as recipients of these service programs. So the third interrogation is a lack of awareness of bodily autonomy and unequal realization of bodily rights in different segments of society. So even in the most restrictive settings, wealthier women are able to travel to either a different city or a different province or sometimes even a different country to procure an abortion service, right? So you can actually look at access to safe abortion as a tipping point of economic injustice. So a woman who has lived a cycle of vulnerabilities, she has no access to services, she lives in a place that is far away, she may be a victim of domestic violence or rape, and she's the one who needs the service and may not be able to access the service, right? Oh, sorry. Oh, darn it. Okay. So, and in this we have to see, in our SRHR programming, we see poor bodies as valuable as rich bodies, but also that gender non-conforming bodies are as valuable as gender-conforming bodies, right? Because inside SRHR, inside the DHS, we have men and women. We may not actually have a lot of information or data collection on LGBTIO transgender people, right? And bodies that perform functions of reproduction are considered more valuable and targets of programs rather than bodies that do not. So which is why all of our work and services, our data is aimed at people, women of the reproductive age between 15 and 49, right? So this is also something we need to interrogate. So is that our view of like making equitable access and creating greater equality, right? Pleasurable sex is as valuable and deserving of services, attention, products as procreative sex. So, I think it's in, yeah. So, what society is then able to provide a basis for this? Where can we see this sexual and reproductive justice, which is part of an economic justice framework, right? So, even in the free market system, are choices equated with autonomy and freedom necessarily? Okay, and what is the freedom to be? Are all bodies considered as equal, or within the context of sexuality, are all bodies considered equally desirable? Okay, so when we talk about, okay, this is a bit. So what is the commodification of bodies? So what we've done is that we've not only done about SRHR, right, and services that bodies need, but every body has a part that is needs a service or a product. So whether that is from a shampoo to lip gloss to eyeshadow to lipstick to skin cream, every part of the body needs to be made desirable in accordance with, let's say, a market economy. Okay? And you also have proliferation of mass media images. And this mass media images is in a distorted manner produces a hegemony of bodies, is a hegemony of bodies which are considered desirable and a hegemony of desire itself or pleasure itself, right? And these are like, you know, these are some of the images that we see in magazines, but which are artificially altered in order to create this hegemony. And there are different parts of the bodies who are considered more, how do I say, associated with sex than other parts of the body, right? And some bodies are seen as more deserving of pleasure and more deserving of sex as compared to others. So sexy is defined as sexually attractive, appealing, exciting, worthy of sexual romantic desire and interest. Sexy bodies are deemed more worthy of this than unsexy bodies, right? And a greater homogenization of what is considered sexy over time in a capitalist culture is happening. And we can see this across all of our societies. So then sexy needs to be a commodity that can be made and sold. And we can see this, right? Okay. So I'm going to show you some of this entire spectrum of discourse, especially by the feminist movement, which has talked about beauty standards and, you know, and I'm just going to talk about some, how do I say, I guess the tipping point of, let's say, alteration of the bodies in order to fit this homogenization, right? So, for example, breasts are now no longer natural breasts. They are two perfect spheres with very of specific shape, symmetry, and size, right? So in the past, I guess we had a greater understanding of what beautiful breasts look like, but now there is only one, okay? The other is, the most recent phenomena is actually what is called the designer nipple. I kid you not, okay? So there is a version of how the areola needs to be smaller, lighter in color, and how do I say, what's that? Uplifted, yes, it's uplifted. And this is actually deemed as the 2017 cosmetic trend. And then you had, I think in the first day that Michael Tan showed this entire, like, how do I say, the diversity of what the labia and the clitoris looks like, right? And we used to say that variety was a spice of life. However, five-fold increase in women seeking designer vaginas and girls as young as 10 years old are now dissatisfied with the way their labia looks. So this is a pre-surgery and a post-surgery idea of the perfect designer vagina. So we need to interrogate this mainstream understanding of desire and desirable bodies, you know, and how the market has actually entered into our bodies, and we need to become consumers in order to enjoy things that were actually freely available before to us. So is sexy a state of the body that we create, or is it a state of being and mind and well-being that we need to aspire for? So the democratization of sex, of bodies, of pleasure without commodification of sexuality and bodies is, in my opinion, an integral part of any economically just system. So it is not regulation, but recognition, acceptance, respect for different bodies and different sexualities, you know, is something that we need to think about. So there's also, like in the previous work around SRHR, and you know that, you know, concepts such as like pleasure, the erotics or the utilities of the erotics were things that we had used to free ourselves, right? But now there is co-optation of these concepts, which was previously signifying individual freedoms and liberties to commodities. So sensuality is a bath salt, you know, pleasure is an ice cream, erotic is a lipstick, okay? And so for me, I feel that an economically just world is also a world where pleasure is a right, but that pleasure is plural, it's diverse, and it's democratized. You know, so I think that's very important to understand that sexual justice is very much part of an economic justice framework. So, that's all. Thank you.